People X Participation. Change that adds up.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the People X Participation podcast, where young people and professionals come together to talk honestly about participation, power, and change. Today's episode is in partnership with Bright Futures, and it centres on one simple but often overlooked question. What happens when we actually listen to young people and build systems around what they tell us? Last year, we ran a national listening lab with young people aged 12 to 25 living with long-term illness and/or disability. They spoke openly about how education affects their confidence, their aspirations, and their sense of self, and about the barriers they face navigating systems that often weren't designed with them in mind. Their insights then informed a national report which has been shared with decision makers and senior professionals alike, making sure that lived experience is embedded into practice, policy, and culture. Today, we'll be reflecting on what the young people shared, the impact of their insights, and how organisations like Bright Futures are serious about inclusion, trust, and long-term impact. So we're joined by some fantastic guests, professionals from Bright Futures, and the young people who helped shape this project. So why don't you introduce yourselves? Let's start with you, Josh.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here. My name is Josh Pelled. I am the founder and chief exec of Bright Futures UK. We are the first and only organisation set up to support children and young people who are out of education due to long-term illnesses. Great to be here.
It's lovely to have you. Thank you so much. And now turning to our young person in the room, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks. So I'm Eden. I'm based in Northern Ireland. I was part of the listening lab last year, and I'm also a young consultant for Participation People.
Thank you so much for being here, the both of you. So, Josh, can you tell us about how this all started? What did Bright Futures set out to achieve, and why did you need young people to make it possible?
Absolutely. Great question. So giving you a quick overview of Bright Futures. Bright Futures was set up almost 10 years ago off the back of my own personal experience. I was out of education twice for cancer, both times pretty critical times in education, fundamental learning all the way through to GCSE and A-level exams. I progressed on to university, thankfully, but realized that there was no charity or organization set up to support children and young people who were facing long-term illness within their education. So we very naively set up an organization to help some young people. Nearly 10 years later, we have snowballed to become the national organization for this issue, supporting thousands of young people each year. But what was really apparent when we've been growing and when we've been doing our great work was that there's been no data on the number of young people who are out of education for long-term illnesses. So we're going to funders, we're going to statutory providers, we're going to other charities, and we're saying, this is what we do. And they would turn around and say, who are you here for? So we would say, we're here for young people who are out of education for long-term illnesses. That's fantastic. How many young people does this affect? And we didn't have an answer. So very quickly became apparent that this was an issue where there was very little information and data behind it. What's led to the work, the fantastic partnership work we've had with Participation People, was really Bright Futures wanting to spearhead and lead the charge on trying to define how many young people each year are affected by long-term illness and education. So that's very much where the questions stem from, and very much where the work with Participation People to put on the listening lab came from.
Thank you so much, Josh. That's really inspiring to hear about how Bright Futures started in the first place as well. And you've set us up nicely to lead into my next question. And this one's for you, Eden. How did you get involved in the first place? And more importantly, why?
So I've had my own lived experience with chronic illness for the last kind of 4 years. I've navigated the education system. Unfortunately, I had to drop out of university. Also the healthcare system. So I thought it would be a really great experience to kind of like share my own insights. But I've also worked with a lot of young people from like different charities like Long COVID Kids, Allergy UK, who've kind of faced similar scenarios. So I thought it would be great to kind of make sure those voices were represented as well. We often, as young people with chronic illness, don't get the opportunity to kind of be able to feed directly into these kind of like bigger, wider discussions. So I was really excited to get this opportunity. I think it was an amazing opportunity to be involved in.
Absolutely amazing. And it's so good to hear about all the other things that you're involved in, and really inspiring again as well about what you're saying about giving people a voice. So I know it was a little bit of time ago, the listening lab. Do you remember much about it, Eden? And if so, what was your experience? How did you find sharing your experiences, working with other young people and feeding into decision makers?
So it was like a really positive experience. I think it was really nice to be in like such a supportive environment with other young people who really understood what we were going through and a lot of like similar experiences. Like obviously it's quite tricky to share your lived experience, especially with people you don't know, but I think it was like everybody kind of really related to one another. So it was really positive experience in that way. I also learned quite a lot about like different education provisions, that kind of thing, because like for example, like I didn't know what a PRU was, which is like pupil referral unit for anybody listening, because we don't have that here. So yeah, I learned quite a lot about like different education systems and experiences. So that was really positive. And I also made a friend through it as well. And we've been able to, he's set up his own charity, supporting young people who have chronic illness with their mental health. And I've actually become a trustee from his charity, but we met through the listening lab. So that was a really like special experience for me.
I'd love to know what charity that was, Eden.
Reach Minds, and the founder's Alex Harrison. So yeah, I had to give him a shout out.
Oh, I got goosebumps from hearing about that. Like, it's incredible that, one workshop and bringing young people together can have such a ripple effect. One last question for you for the moment, Eden. What was the most important thing for you that you shared? Like, what was the key thing that you really wanted decision makers to hear? The one thing that they needed to take away from you sharing your voice and insights?
Yeah, I think the main thing for me was ensuring that young people's voices were represented in them sharing about how things could be better within the education system. Like I know for me, I had to leave university because I didn't feel supported. I didn't like get the additional support that I needed. And I think that's quite common for quite a lot of young people. And sometimes the young people like feel like they might have to leave or they might not be able to stay in school for a number of different reasons. And I think often sometimes young people with chronic illness definitely feel like the education system's just not built for them. And that can be really like upsetting to kind of see. And yeah, so I think there definitely needs to be more support and recognition of the challenges that young people face, not just with their education, but also like the other aspects that come with that and how that can obviously impact their education.
When Bright Futures was set up, we had a co-founder, a lovely girl called Natalie, who was a good friend of mine at university. And she unfortunately dropped out of university due to cancer, a situation unfortunately many experience. But that was the inspiration for Bright Futures. She unfortunately had to leave university. From when I was 5 all the way to when I was at university, we saw there was no one doing anything to support young people who were facing this exact circumstance. So Natalie, who's a co-founder of this charity, was the inspiration for the charity because she left university. She didn't know what to do. It wasn't about the learning because she was old enough now that learning wasn't a critical part of her development, but it was about what do I do now? How do I go into the working world? My friends have seen me go through something so substantial, but they don't know how to support me. They don't know what to say to me. What do I do? So you're not alone, unfortunately. It's exactly how Bright Futures came about, but it's so lovely to see how you've turned an experience that you had into being a youth ambassador, being a trustee of charity, being something that so many young people wouldn't even be aware of if they hadn't gone through such unfortunate circumstances. So credit to you, just props and claps. Well done. You've done amazing.
Thank you so much.
You've actually touched on a really important and key and inspiring thing, Josh. It's the young people's ability to turn experiences that are traumatic, because it is, right? Missing out on such core cultural socialization, learning, all of this package of things. It is traumatic. It stays with you your whole life. And to hone that into something that shines, right? Like you carry that with you, but you take it forwards. You turn it into a tool, you turn it into a dream, into an aspiration. And it's something we see every single day, young people's ability to just hold on to hope and passion and be like, you know what, this thing happened to me, but I'm going to do better. And I'm going to make sure that everybody else gets better. And it's one thing that doesn't get spotlit enough. that just untapped potential for hope and passion and drive. Now I want to talk about spaces, because we're talking about, places where young people can feel welcomed and accessible regardless of their needs, whether that's at uni, education, or something else. And we were talking about the listening lab and how it was a really good experience for Eden particularly. So why are these spaces so important? These spaces of open collaboration and honesty?
I think it's just really important that young people who have lived experience like are obviously shaping the systems that affect them. I think it doesn't make sense for decisions to be made without the young people in the room who have that lived experience and that voice. Because if you don't have the disability, chronic illness, like you can't really understand it. You can try and understand it. And that effort is like really important for people trying to understand it, but you don't really understand it unless you've lived it. So yeah, I think it's just really important that people with lived experience are not only heard, but actually included in the decision-making process in a meaningful way, like our listening lab, for example. So yeah.
I'm echoing exactly what Eden said. The kind of spaces created for young people to be able to share their opinions, views, thoughts, ideas, it is very just simply invaluable. We approach Bright Futures approaches work on kind of two fronts, a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach. The bottom-up approach is very much about carrying out the grassroots work that we do, providing the direct support to young people to be able to overcome challenges they're facing. And it's been very much shaped by the young people we work with. And then our other approach is looking at a top-down approach, is looking at how statutory services and government frame the support they're putting in place for young people facing long-term illnesses, and how there's a massive disconnect between what's meant to be provided, what is provided, and then what young people need. And part of what's happened and what we're seeing at the moment is government recognizing that there is such a big disconnect. That's the reason that there is the education reform bill. That's the reason that the Alan Milburn task force was created. That's the reason why the white paper was released with proposed changes. It's recognition that there is a disconnect between what's currently provided and what young people need. Creating those spaces where you can gain the information directly from young people on what's needed, as I said at the beginning, is completely invaluable. Eden just mentioned it, but unless you have been there, done that, got the t-shirts, you won't know the nuances of how illness affects someone, how treatment affects someone, how it affects mum and dad, how it affects my friends and family and brothers and sisters and teachers and hospital staff. So when you're looking from a statutory lens, from a top-down approach, you're looking at massive budgets. You're looking at localized support on a national scale. And sometimes when you're creating those big picture plans, the individual, the little person, let's call them, gets forgotten. We're making sure it works on a mass scale, but actually the mass scale needs to translate to individuals on the ground. So making sure that we have young people's voices and making sure we have the spaces for young people to be heard, it is just simply invaluable. Make sure that we don't waste resources from government level. We put in place the most sensible, the most responsive, the most meaningfully impactful services possible.
Beautiful from the both of you. Thank you so, so much. So now we've talked about how it started, the work, and we have actually touched upon what came next. Eden has shared some incredible things her end. But what about you, Josh? What has happened since the listening labs? What have you done with all these insights? Tell me everything.
Absolutely. The listening lab was very much part of Bright Futures step into policy work to help identify and outline what the scale of the issue was in the sense of young people with long-term illnesses and education. So the listening lab was a really valuable part, brought to life young people's voices for some of the more quantitative data that we were presenting. We presented our national reports earlier this year, which was really well received by people from the Department of Education, Children's Commission, and so on and so forth. What it's outlined is that there is a scale of issue which the government is not really set up to support. We saw the Alan Milburn report come out last week, which again reinforced a lot of what we're telling different government stakeholders that the issue is significant, the issue is not being responded to properly, and there needs to be more done to support it. So our work from the national report that we relaunched and all the inquiries and consultations we're a part of is really to continue driving force and advocating for young people with long-term illnesses to be recognised. And that is the initial thing that needs to happen. When we're looking at the statutory support in place for young people, it's almost kind of muddled into the SEND response. When a young person has to leave education for 15 days or more, they're meant to be referred to the local authority. The local authority carries out an assessment, and if they deem that the young person needs educational support, puts in place what's called an educational health and care plan. We know that this is a SEND response, but young people with long-term illnesses are part of that response. From everyone we've spoken to within government, both within SEND inquiries, within Department of Education, within Department of Health and Social Care, Children's Commission, there's a lack of recognition for young people with long-term illnesses as their own demographic. And actually that's an unjust response, an unfair response for them. Young people with long-term illnesses have very specific needs, very varying needs, but very specific needs. And currently what's set out by government doesn't take into account the nuances of long-term illnesses. So bringing it back to what Eden said, when we're talking about how we understand the issue, unless you've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, you're not going to understand the issue. And until now, the government hasn't held any data on this. So all of our work now is about amplifying young people's voices, making sure government understands the nuances of long-term illness, chronic illness within education, how they understand what's currently being provided, what they're proposing to be provided, and then most importantly, what should be provided that they're not currently providing. So it's very much about amplifying young people's voices to make sure that the response from all the consultations has a proper response.
Beautiful, thank you. It's like music to our ears, hearing that this isn't just a one and done project. Like, the legacy is continuing and will continue to build momentum as, you know, the passion and the drive to keep this research going just amplifies more and more. Now, turning to you, Eden, what have you done since sharing your insights? What have you been doing since your listening lab? I know you said about trustee work and your friend. Is there anything else that you'd like to share, or any thoughts about what Josh has just said?
Yeah, I mean, I have been able to be involved in a few other research projects more recently about I've actually managed to interview some young people who have lived experience with chronic illness. So it's been really interesting to hear some kind of similar thoughts from the lab that we were involved in, but also from different perspectives as well, even more locally as well. But here in Northern Ireland, I've spoken to some people and kind of learned from their experiences as well within the education system. So it's been interesting to see some similarities and also maybe some differences as well.
So would you say that there's a lot of overlap with different industries, for lack of a better word? I'm sure there's another word there that is much better suited, but I'm getting lots of nods from you. Is that correct, Eden?
Yeah, 100%. I think there is. And I think it's kind of place by place as well. So I think in some areas, there is maybe more support available. There is more resources and kind of opportunities for the young people. There's better kind of more of a joined up approach to the different systems. Whereas in other parts of the country, maybe there isn't. And maybe young people are struggling a little bit more.
And have you seen similar, Josh, from your work, that different industries and sectors is the word I'm missing, different sectors have a lot of overlap and similar challenges?
There's a lot of overlap. I think there's also a lot of geographical disparity between provisions. So building on what Eden said, there's huge disparity between what's provided to someone who's based in London compared to someone who's based in Manchester, compared to someone who's based in Edinburgh, compared to someone who's based in more of the sticks areas of the country. And just bring it back to relevancy now, the Alan Milburn inquiry report does focus on places as a multiplier effect for disadvantage. So they very much look into where you're based can add to the disadvantage or the barriers you may face to access what everyone else should be accessing normally. So location and geographical placement is a big issue.
And is there anything that can be done to deal with that at all? Is that the next stage in this research? Is that the next target to aim for is trying to reduce that geographical disparity, or is it a case that it's a beast that will never fully be tamed?
I hope it's a beast that will be tamed at some point. For Bright Futures, the geographical disparity of provision is something that's very acutely on our radar. At Bright Futures, we're looking to not just reach more young people, but reach more young people in different geographical places across the country. There are some places like London that are really well stocked with services, not just from statutory provisions, but also from charities. There are other areas where there isn't the same level of support. Bright Future services have been built around that in mind, that young people can't always physically access services. So sometimes we need to be creative in how we can reach young people with those services. And our online services definitely help make sure that we can reach young people no matter where they are.
Before we go, I have one final question. We're talking a lot about influence and power and systems change and doing it alongside young people. So really, why? Why is it so important? You know, we've been saying about been there, got the t-shirt, we can't do it about lived experience. But there's more to it than that, right? There's depths to why we're actually doing this rather than just for young people, but with them. So I wanted to ask you both, if we didn't listen to young people when shaping these systems, what would actually happen?
Yeah, it just wouldn't work. I think people just, like, they wouldn't understand how to support us. Young people would just fall through the gaps. People just wouldn't get involved. They wouldn't feel like they're being listened to. We would just disengage, really, if we didn't felt like we were given that opportunity to kind of input in a way that works for us. But yeah, it just definitely wouldn't work.
I would agree with Ethan. I think that if different stakeholders didn't listen to young people when shaping the support that's provided to them, you'd have support that just doesn't hit the target at all. And unfortunately, to a certain extent, we see that now. We see systems and support that's been set up in a time that we don't live in anymore. COVID and post-COVID world has changed the way young people engage with education, engage with educators, and engage with each other. So I think you really would see a system that's completely broken. Having young people's voices doesn't just make sure that it works for them, we're making sure it works for everyone. And again, looking at that top-down approach of what's being provided by government, by other organizations, you also start to go into a realm where resources are wasted. Taxpayers' money is wasted, people's time are wasted, and you don't actually get meaningful outcomes. So you have to listen to young people. You have to understand what challenges they're facing. You have to understand how to put in place proper levels of support to make sure that it's meaningful for them, but meaningful for everyone else who plays a part in putting it on, whether it's taxpayers' money going into it, whether it's the members of staff in local authorities and charities who are dedicating their time to providing the support. It has to work for everyone.
100%. You know, a lot of people see Youth Voice as a nice to have. It's the warm and fuzzies, it's the cherry on top. And then, you know, some people, it's, oh no, it's a bit more than that. But it is everything. And it's almost like we're approaching an iceberg. And all the young people are like, listen to us, please. Come on, like, let's just avoid it. It is a reality that we are either all facing now or we're going to face one way or another. So if you are listening in, please make sure to challenge yourself. And if you don't know how, get in touch. And I'd love to start the conversation with you to see how we can get young people to engage with you and to really make sure that the embedding of the system is really done properly. So in 10, 20, 30, 40 years' time, the systems still work for those who it's meant to serve and for everybody else the way it's supposed to be.
I was going to make a point about how it's on your point about how people think that youth voices are the warm and fuzzy thing that's nice to have. And actually, they sometimes look at young people as, oh, you're a young person, you don't really know what you're talking about. You've got a very juvenile, very, very limited worldview. But actually, I think that's a huge injustice to young people, particularly young people going through long-term illnesses and challenges like that. A lot of the time, unfortunately, young people have to grow up quicker than they would normally do if they were in mainstream education. And there's huge, huge benefits to them as individuals having gone through something like that. So I think it's really short-sighted, really terrible that a lot of people do think of young people's voices as just young people's voices. They a lot of the time hold a lot more weight than many individuals who are working on the deliverables of this support. So it should definitely never be seen as a young person's voice, nice and fluffy. It should be seen as arguably the most critical point of developing services.
No, exactly that. People don't really see the value 100% of youth voice. We see young people all the time, whether they're 8 years old, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 21, and they will be changing our minds and giving us fresh creative solutions that we would never have thought up in a boardroom. And they are just as important as our voices. Our voices includes young voices too. So before we go, does anyone have anything else to say? Eden, would you like to share anything about what we've just spoken about?
I totally agree. I think that within that as well, the feedback loop is so important. I think being really open and honest and transparent with the young people from the start about maybe if there's ideas that they have within the session, or if they're being given this opportunity to be consulted, tell them, be honest about what you're going to do as well, and follow through with that. And maybe if there's something that you can't do, also tell them that. I think as a young person with chronic illness, we do sometimes face quite a lot of gaslighting, and trust can be quite difficult to kind of build between different systems, different groups, kind of things that we get involved in. So I think just being really open and honest and giving us the opportunity to feedback is so important. But yeah, just definitely not a tick box exercise, because that is probably the worst thing that you can do.
Thank you so much for raising the feedback loop, because I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. Is the project's done, lovely, we've got our insights, we're doing what we're doing, and then they move on to the next thing. And then the young people are left feeling undervalued, they don't know what's going on. And I think, that honest, transparent dialogue, like you were saying, is so important. Actually talking to people, young people as equals, and like a person, hey, this is what we can and we can't do. And it sounds really complicated, but it's not. It's really simple at its core, isn't it? It's just a conversation.
I'd just like to say thank you to Eden, first for being part of the Listening Lab, and secondly, for continuing the work after the Listening Lab. I'd encourage any young person who's going through a long-term or chronic illness to get in touch with an organization that is looking to support them, whether that's Bright Futures or someone else. The work that we do as organizations is only supported by young people's voices to be able to take it further, take it forward, put you guys on a platform and be able to put you in front of decision makers. So please get in touch with organizations you're aware of, you're working with, Bright Futures. We're doing a lot to advise government and try and help steer statutory services and other organizations in the right direction. So please be a part of that and work with an organization you'd like to.
Thank you so much, the both of you, for joining today. It has been such an inspiring and empowering discussion. And I know a lot of people listening will be very encouraged to try something new, to listen to youth voices and try and start to shift the systems in even small ways. But truly, thank you so much for being here, the both of you. And what this conversation really shows is that young people living with long-term illnesses and disability, they don't need fixing, but the systems that serve them do. And that's what we're here to do. That's what we're trying, and that's what we're going to continue to try. And the first step towards doing that and bettering these systems is listening properly and consistently, honestly and transparently, as we just discussed. This episode sits alongside Bright Future's new report, and if you're interested in reading it and diving into the research, you can find it linked in the caption. This report ensures that youth voice isn't just captured, but is carried forward into decision-making spaces each and every day. Not just at the end of the project, not just now, but moving forwards. And I cannot wait to see what comes next for the both of you guests and Bright Futures and everyone listening. If you want to learn more about this work, head to the caption. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.